welcome back to another episode of Policy and Profits. I'm EJ Antoni. I like to play an economist on TV, but more importantly, I am joined by the one, the only trader extraordinaire of Ascalon 6 Capital, Antony Esposito. Anthony, how are you doing today?
EJ, I never get tired of that introduction. Doing okay. Very busy, winning at life. No shortage of activity on the desk as far as headlines and as far as market moves, but it's been good. It's been an interesting launch to 2026. How have you been? How is the Heritage Foundation? How is life? You're all over the media circuit and all over X. Keeping busy?
Oh, we are certainly keeping busy. It's a lot of incoming, just constant stream of information. In part because, as you know, we had that government shutdown at the end of last year. The Democrats just wanted to hold everybody hostage till they got their way on healthcare, which was so weird because then they just decided to kind of randomly give in at the end and didn't even get any of their demands. But whatever. The important point here is that regarding economic releases, there was a huge backlog because, unfortunately, some of the statistical agencies decided to just send their workers home instead of making them actually go out and do their jobs, which is crazy because all those people ended up getting back pay, right? All those federal workers still got paid, so they ended up just getting paid for not doing anything. So what does that mean for you and me and the listeners? It means that all this data that we should have been getting relatively on time was all delayed, and some of it we still haven't gotten today. So, for example, we're not even going to get our first look at fourth quarter GDP until February. I think it's delayed until February 20th now.
Okay.
Is the latest revised date. So what should have happened, at let's say the end of January is not going to be now until closer to the end of February. Like we just got retail sales data for November, for example, and that's the advance estimate. It's not even the revised numbers, Anthony. So that's a lot of what we're dealing with now is this kind of tidal wave of data coming in, where you're playing catch up, and a lot of the news releases are coming in at much shorter intervals than they normally would be. Instead of things being separated by a month like they usually are, maybe they're only separated by a week or two. So a lot of incoming data as we try to get a sense of where the economy is headed. Unfortunately, a lot of it is stale. It is looking in the rearview mirror, but hey, better than nothing, right?
Yeah, well, we know the BLS is good at working quickly and accurately. So this is nothing new for them, right? Sarcasm. So we're ingesting a ton of economic data on the desk. CPI and PPI this week.
Mhm.
We had initial claims today. CPI, PPI, overall, broad statement, look like they're kind of running cooler than under Biden and basically flat for the last few months. So that's a good thing. Definitely need to continue to press that lower as far as CPI. And I think drill baby drill will have a big part in that, even though we've seen a big spike in crude over the past few days, but that's more geopolitical. Initial jobless claims a little better. So overall, the economic news, inflation news is neutral to good. And then you throw on top regulations, you throw on top the big, beautiful bill, you throw on top investments, and we seem to be moving in the right direction, I would say, overall. The one thing that's been stuck in the thorn in President Trump's side and everyone's side really has been Jerome Powell. And he's been kind of biased and kind of a tripwire since he's been in his position at the Fed, in my opinion. So this kind of feud's gone back and forth where President Trump has continued to give his opinion openly, which, by the way, I don't know how a president giving an opinion openly is actually impeding on the independence of the Fed. I think the president should be able to say what he wants and should be able to say what he thinks. The fact that Jerome Powell gets his feathers so ruffled if the president's opinion is contrary to what Jerome is doing, I think shows that Mr. Powell really can't support with data, as he always says, data-driven. He really can't support with the data what he is doing. So recently, away from monetary policy, they have conducted a renovation of the Fed building, which is now in overrun at $2.5 billion. You may remember, EJ, the image of President Trump and Jerome Powell in hard hats reviewing the bill about a month and a half, 2 months ago at the construction site. And by the way, if you're going to spar with President Trump, I don't think it should be at a construction site. I would think he's got home field advantage there. So they're running through it, and Jerome Powell looks like, Bob the Builder with the hard hat on, and President Trump is pointing out the overrun and the expenses and what's going on. Jerome Powell then goes to the Senate Banking Committee, gives a statement and testimony as far as what's going on across the board. And then there's some inquiry into, hey, what did you say? What did you mean when you said this in front of the Senate? Nothing more than an inquiry. You put a post up, which was kind of right to point. He gets the inquiries. They're not answering the inquiries. He then receives a subpoena. So go into a little bit, because you're right there. I mean, you're down in D.C. and you're in the thick of it. So he gets an inquiry, doesn't answer, and then he gets a subpoena to answer the questions and to discuss exactly what he said and what he meant. And all of a sudden, it's intimidation, and he's got a TikTok video going. But what pushed you to create this post? Where are you at with this?
Well, this is a quote, Anthony, from a piece I wrote for the Daily Signal. So anybody can go online and read it. It's not behind a paywall or anything. It's free to read, and hopefully our crack production staff can get the hostage video of Jerome Powell, and we can play that in a little bit. But basically, what we outlined in this piece is just simply the fact that it didn't have to be this way with Powell getting investigated, because what happened was he went and testified before Congress. He said some things that may or may not have been true. When you look at the cost overruns, I don't know. It seems to me like what he said wasn't true. It's maybe there's some kind of justification or explanation for it. Whatever the case, when Congress asks you for information, you're obliged to provide that information. And because he didn't, it was referred to the DOJ. And the DOJ asked him for the information, and he would not provide it. He ignored them. So the consequence of that was that then the DOJ had to issue a formal subpoena and say, okay, if now you don't provide us with this information, then things are going to get ugly for you. That's when you could be looking at, let's say, an indictment. But that's, again, it doesn't have to be that way. If Jerome Powell simply complies with the request from DOJ, which was to give the information that he refused to give to Congress, then this should be open and shut. And likewise, if Powell did nothing wrong, then it's open and shut, right? What is he so afraid of? Why can everyone not take a look at the books, so to speak? Maybe he does have something to hide. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. Maybe this is just a you-know-what contest that he's having with the administration here, where he thinks he can keep all of this confidential when he can't. So that's basically what we outline in the piece here. The idea that this is somehow an attack on the Fed's monetary independence, I mean, give me a break. There's nothing could be further from the truth. To a certain extent, it's hard to see how the administration is even involved here. Again, the DOJ is involved because the matter was referred to them by Congress. This did not initiate, in other words, in the White House. This did not initiate with the DOJ. This is basically just a necessary escalation to try to get the info that Congress asked for in the first place.
Yeah, agreed. And like I said the other day, I actually was talking about this earlier this week, and I don't think President Trump initiated this, but I don't think he's losing any sleep over it. He's upset with Powell, and he should be. And if this is moving through due process, why is the response from the head of the U.S. Fed, who's in charge of price stability and full employment in the United States of America, the largest economy in the world, why is he crying, "Why are you picking on me?" instead of answering the question? I mean, I want people with a thicker skin than this in positions of power, and this is a position of power. So this isn't really important to me because Jerome and Donald don't like each other and they're not playing nice in the sandbox. It's really not. It's a problem for me because the president of the United States has given an opinion of where he thinks this should be. The head of the Fed, the chair of the Fed, has consistently done the wrong thing without giving reason. And now when he's being called to answer some questions about this ridiculous project, his answer is, "Why are you picking on me with the puppy dog eyes?" So I referenced the TikTok video earlier. Let's take a look at the video and think, is this really the behavior of somebody who's in such position of power in this country?
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned, in part, a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president. This is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. I have served at the Federal Reserve under 4 administrations, Republicans and Democrats alike. In every case, I have carried out my duties without political fear or favor, focused solely on our mandate of price stability and maximum employment. Public service sometimes requires standing firm in the face of threats. I will continue to do the job the Senate confirmed me to do, with integrity and a commitment to serving the American people. Thank you.
So I just have to say, whoever's writing the cues for all of the media and whoever's writing the cues for Ilhan Omar and Pelosi and Schumer, and they obviously wrote for him what they wanted him to say. To use words like democracy, threat, integrity, the American people, you're gaslighting beyond gaslighting. All right, this is about you answering questions like a big boy. Put your big boy pants on, answer the questions, and move on. And try not to mess this up anymore before you leave. And that's really how I feel, shockingly enough. You have gone through a great time. Honestly, am I right? Is this like a puppy dog TikTok, or is this not?
Anthony, I think you hit the nail on the head, first of all, with the gaslighting, right? He says he respects the rule of law or whatever the nonsense that he just spouted. If you respect the rule of law, if you follow the rule of law, Mr. Chairman, then why didn't you just simply answer the questions that Congress had for you? Why didn't you respond to the the director of the Office of Management and Budget when they had questions about your marble floors with gold inlays and your private elevators for members of the Board of Governors at the Fed? I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And look, if you're all of a sudden embarrassed that news about your palace on the Potomac, if you will, your new Versailles, if you're embarrassed about those details getting out, then maybe you shouldn't have made those decisions for those kinds of renovations in the first place. But whatever the case may be, to try to cover it up now or whatever he's doing by refusing to provide this information to people in Congress, to people in the admin, as an attorney, you should know better, right? And let's be clear, there was no threat here. And nobody was talking about an indictment until the word came out of Powell's mouth himself. Again, as an attorney, he should know better at every stage in this process. As an attorney, he should know when Congress requests information like this, to which they are entitled, you are obliged to give it to them. As an attorney, he should know that it could get referred to the DOJ, and that when the DOJ requests it and you refuse still to provide it, that a grand jury subpoena could be incoming. And again, as an attorney, he should know that there is no indictment coming so long as he simply provides the information he should have provided months ago in the first place. So he knows better. Again, not because he's an economist. He isn't. He's an attorney. He should know better because he understands this whole process.
Yep. But above all else, he is a Democrat, and he's resisting what this administration is trying to do for the betterment of the country. So yeah, I would get insulted too if you were asking me questions and I had something to hide. I would, if I, this is like me going in yelling at my little kid about, the homework not being done or the room being messy, and then getting on TikTok and making a video about how much they hate their dad and how, well, I don't know, I don't do that and my kids are great, but I'm just saying it's like a little kid getting caught, chewing bubblegum in class and then making a video about how upset they are that they're even being asked about chewing bubblegum in class. If you ask the kid not chewing gum, he has no problem in saying, I'm not chewing gum. There's nothing wrong here. So it's the same thing. It's rules for thee, not for me. It's an overspend of taxpayer dollars. He clearly has no respect for taxpayer dollars or for this country or for our deficit or debt or any of the above because of how he acts on a day-to-day in his chair, in his seat as chair. And this is no different. It's just a complete disrespect for the nation, for us, for the president. It's unacceptable. We've gone through a great series over the past year about the rates and how Jerome Powell has aggravated the system and the president with his management of monetary policy. So I'm pulling up from Bloomberg a nice little chart of rates from 2016, or really 2011 through 16, where they were dead flat and zero. And it's a great visual. I really want to talk through this with you because you've done a great job of going through what he's done and when he's done it. We had rates essentially at zero coming into 2016. President Trump takes first term, right? And then we have an economy with sub 2% inflation, strong economic growth, strong jobs growth. Things are moving. Things are going extremely well. We were into the first round of the tariff conversations and scare. That came and went pretty quickly. That was in June. And you can see this red line ticking higher and higher and higher. So from zero, essentially, or 75 bips to 3%. Explain to me why that's a problem. Why was Jerome Powell raising rates into a strong economy with good labor numbers, good economic growth, low inflation? That should be the spot, I think. You tell me. That should be the spot where President Trump says, wow, Jerome Powell's doing a great job. He left it alone. We're doing great. All things are humming. But instead, he started raising rates into the face of that. Should that have been a problem, and why?
Well, it was a problem, Anthony. So if we go back to this first Trump term, the Fed, they're a bunch of Keynesians, right? It's basically 300 PhD economists who have no idea what they're doing because they still use all these flawed models with the Phillips curve, where they've been proven wrong time and time again. They think that if the economy keeps growing, or it might grow too much, and then you could have inflation. Economic growth doesn't cause inflation. How does people being more productive, more people having jobs, more products and services available in the economy, how does any of that cause inflation? Bunch of nonsense. And it was proved wrong very, very thoroughly in the Reagan years when we had that tremendous boom, all of that economic growth, right? Supply side effects are a very real phenomenon. So what Powell did during the first term, as you can see there, he's steadily raising rates throughout 2017, 18, and into 19. They finally pause in 19 because they're starting to see a tremendous amount of stress in money markets. Why? Because they've over tightened. So at the same time you have this chart, what's going on in this chart, I should say, you have the balance sheet being run off, meaning the Fed is selling assets. They're trying to contract the money supply. And it gets to the point where they contract too much and things start to break. By the fall of 2019, you actually have a mini financial crisis. Now, the Fed jumps on it very quickly, and they conduct basically a $500 billion bailout of leveraged hedge funds. So that prevented a kind of 2009 meltdown, but it still was a sign that the last several years of tightening, the Fed overdid it. There's just no other way to say it, right? The Fed went way, way too far with tightening during that time. And so Trump was right in the first term to repeatedly complain about Powell hiking rates too much, about interest rates being too high at the Fed. Yes, that actually happened. And that's why you can see on this chart in 2019, they had to start cutting rates. And sure enough, they did not cut enough and soon enough. Then the huge drop is just from COVID, right? They have the emergency rate cuts. They basically put rates back down to zero. They essentially operate somewhere between 0 and a quarter of a percentage point, the 25 bips. Then what happens? Why is it so flat for so long? It didn't need to stay that flat.
But wait, I want to pause 1 second. And I respectfully, I mean, everything you're saying is beyond, my thought process, and you're running through this perfectly. But let's just note that big line down was 175 basis points in 10 days.
Right.
In 10
Great point.
days. I mean, this is, if you want to talk about chasing your tail and realizing you have a real problem and being manic, I understand you traded through, lived through, whatever, COVID. I understand the situation, but this was a manic reaction to him already being off balance and in the wrong position as COVID was hitting, in my opinion. That was that straight deadline down. So I just want to add that for a second and put in perspective how quickly and how manic those cuts were.
Anthony, it's a great point. And then they keep them way too low for way too long. Look, I understand if you want to keep them that low when you're still not sure how COVID is going to turn out. But by the time you're getting into late summer or fall of 2020, your horizon, or I should say your confidence interval is really starting to shrink at that point. In other words, you're getting a much clearer sense of direction. And then by the time you're into, I mean, early or even mid 2021, it is crystal clear that this is not anywhere near as big a deal as we thought it was going to be. The economy, most of the economy at that point had already been reopened. Things were humming along. I mean, even just by the time Biden takes office, the economy is growing at an annualized rate of $1.5 trillion. Like, things are just fine. But the Fed keeps rates artificially low. Why? Because Powell is up for his renomination. And let's not forget, you can see there's an initial tick up there in early 2022. They raised by 25 bips. And then Powell is telling us, no, don't worry about this real big, the 75 basis point hike. That's off the table. But what did Powell do as soon as he was actually reconfirmed by the Senate? That's when he drops the hammer, gives us 4 of those jumbo-sized rate hikes in a row, and that's where you get this sharp escalation that you can see on this graph. And even that isn't enough to counter the 40-year high inflation at this point that he has helped cause. And so you have to keep rates going all the way up to 5.5. And then,
and that led to, and honest, just to interrupt again, sorry.
No, you're good.
That leads to a regional banking crisis.
Yes.
And it leads to a 27% drawdown in the S&P 500. That was a legitimate bear market, 27% down. I think we didn't start to recover from that trough for 6 to 8 months out. That was a real move down, created for created by Mr. Powell.
Absolutely. It's a great point, Anthony, and a really great reminder. It wasn't just Powell saying that a certain size of interest rate hikes are off the table. He was actually telling the banking sector, broadcasting to them, saying explicitly that these ultra low interest rates are the new normal, and we have no intention to move them anytime soon. And that's why everyone gobbled up all these low interest rate securities. So he had his reasons for trying to do that, and the result was pretty catastrophic. It was the fastest inflation in 40 years, the fastest rise in market interest rates in just as long. The regional banking crisis that you mentioned, you're absolutely right, Anthony. It has effectively frozen over the housing market. And then what do they do right before the election? Well, they do an emergency rate cut. I mean, you cannot tell me that this guy is not a political animal, that he is somehow data dependent and politically independent, as he said in that little hostage video of his. It is absolute nonsense. And if you look at the metrics today on which he says he relies, whether that's labor market data, inflation data, you name it, these indicators are more in favor of rate cuts today, and have been for all of 2025. They were much more in favor of interest rate cuts then, as opposed to when he actually gave us that emergency rate cut right before the election. And so again, what's the difference? Well, they were trying to get Kamala Harris across the finish line, maybe. That was the difference. She's not on the ticket right now. I mean, again, it's hard to interpret Powell's actions as anything other than political. But even if you want to give him that benefit of the doubt, Anthony, fine. He is still wrong. He was wrong in 2017, 18, and 19. He was wrong in 21, 22, 23, 24, and 25.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And when you look at what he's done inside and between the Trump administrations 1 and 2, it is very easy to objectively see how bad he's been and how Trump could be so frustrated with him. I would add very quickly that the spike in rates, as he was promising zero forever, created obviously the banking crisis, which essentially had, in a very dummied down way, which is perfect for me, you were receiving 50 bips on your assets, but now you owed 3%, 4%, 5% out on your liabilities. So you turn the model upside down, not only for the banks, but this is how ridiculous Powell is. He did it to the Fed himself. And to this day, they're losing money. What are they, down to $100 billion a year, $200 billion now? Because of the fact that they owe so much more out on liabilities than they're gaining on the assets that they hold. So he was so stupid, he did it to the Fed and to the banking system, not only to the banking system. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong there, and then I want to wrap it up because this has been a great show and we're kind of in that spot. But I mean, is that an accurate depiction of balance sheets and losses both in the banking system and at the Fed?
And Anthony, so you're absolutely right, and it's not just the realized losses, which is what ultimately sunk, SVB and some of the other banks and plenty of regional banks that you rightly brought up earlier. But you also have these unrealized losses, which is kind of a crisis in the making, so to speak, because if these banks have to start, if they need to raise liquidity quick, let's say, they're going to have to start selling assets to do that. That's perfectly normal. But now they're selling devalued assets. They're going to have to sell some of these things at a loss. They're going to have to realize the unrealized losses that are on the books, which today it's hundreds of billions of dollars. That's how large of a scale the problem is for the banking sector. And if you look at the Fed, it's almost $1 trillion, I think, of unrealized losses on their balance sheet. So it's absolutely problematic. And this whole disaster didn't have to happen. It happened because of Powell's bad judgment, because he has no idea what he's doing when it comes to monetary policy. Sadly, he was one of Trump's worst picks, I think.
Yeah, which is saying something because there have been some pretty bad picks. No knock on President Trump, but between the two administrations, there's been some bad picks, and I agree with you. I think he's at the top of the list of the bad. We're going to head into the market next week. There's definitely a lot of action. We've seen some really great moves, in particular the small caps running ahead of the large caps, and those Mag 7 names taking a little bit of a hit. Gold has been on fire. Silver's been on fire. Crude oil out of control. But a lot of this has to do with this geopolitical news and this kind of fear that's underlying in the market, as the fundamentals seem to be economically, and the technicals for sure are pushing prices higher. So next week, we're going to really dig into the profit side. EJ and Tony, thank you so much for the show. As always, it was a pleasure. The insight's wonderful. I always appreciate it. If anyone has any interest in taking a look at your stuff, you're at Real EJ Antony on X. I would highly suggest and recommend doing that. On that thread every day. I am at CMT_Anthony on X, and the website is Ascalon6capital.com. Feel free to jump on. Feel free to send me an email if you'd like about the fund, any questions. Anthony.Esposito@Ascalon6capital.com. EJ, have a great rest of your week, sir. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon.
Till then, Anthony.